Hi, I'm Sarah Wickham, the Policy and Research Manager at Philanthropy Australia. Today I'm chatting with my colleague Christian Seibert. As you know, he is the Policy Advisor to Philanthropy Australia, but he's also the Industry Fellow at the Centre for Social Impact at Swinburne. We've got Christian here today talking about his findings of his sub-fund survey, the first of its kind in Australia. So thank you for your time, Christian. I'm just going to jump in and ask you a few questions.
Yeah, no worries.
So what are sub-funds?
So you can think of sub-funds as a form of a giving account or a mini foundation that sits within a larger public foundation. So a donor can go to a variety of different providers, be it a community foundation, a wealth manager, a trustee company, and set up a sub-fund with them. And basically it's a named account within the public foundation that the provider runs, and you make a donation which is allocated against your account, and it's invested along with all the other sub-funds that they've got, and it grows hopefully over time. And what you can do is you can then make recommendations to the trustees of the public foundation about charities that you want to make grants to, and then the trustees, check everything's okay and approve those recommendations. So they're an alternative to, for example, setting up a private ancillary fund, a PAF, and private ancillary funds have revolutionised philanthropy in Australia. They're a really fantastic vehicle for philanthropy, but they're not for everybody. And there are some advantages that sub funds have in terms of you don't have to comply with sort of the regulatory requirements, that the provider does all of that. You don't have to hold board meetings and things like that. So if a PAF's not for you, then maybe a sub-fund will be for you. And in particular, if you're looking to sort of have a smaller amount of assets to donate, then a sub-fund might be particularly attractive.
So why did you decide to survey sub-funds?
So when I started at CSI Swinburne last year, I realised that although sub-funds anecdotally were growing in popularity, and they were certainly an important part of the philanthropic sector, there was basically no data on them. We didn't know how many there were, how much assets they had in them, donations in, how many grants they were making, the value of those grants. We had no information about them. And so basically I wanted to sort of address that data gap so that we've got more information about an important part of the philanthropic sector. And so I did this survey. I went out to the providers of all the major providers, and also some smaller providers of sub-funds right across Australia, and was really pleased with the response to the survey. 18 respondents, large and small, and we've got some great data.
Great. And what were the main findings from the survey?
So we've got nearly 2,000 sub-funds in Australia, so just under 1,995 sub-funds in Australia, and they collectively hold $1 billion in assets. This is all data for 2017-18, by the way, and in that year there were donations into sub-funds of 123.5 million. So if you consider that the assets are 1 billion at the end of the year, that's a pretty large amount of donations going in, which does indicate that they are quite popular and that they are growing, but we'll need to see data over time to check that. And they made 6,304 grants in that year, worth $57 million. So it's a pretty decent slice of the philanthropic sector.
And for our audience, what's the difference between sub-funds and private ancillary funds?
Yeah, so they're, as I said, they're not a standalone foundation. They're an account within a larger public foundation. And there are some differences in terms of just the scale of sub-funds and PAFs. So, for example, at the end of the last financial year, there were 1,653 PAFs in Australia. So there are more sub-funds than there are PAFs in Australia. But PAFs have a lot more assets. There are $8.3 billion of assets held by PAFs. And they made grants. This data's from a couple of years ago because there's a bit of a lag, of $457 million. So there is a bit of a difference there.
And before we go, can you explain the differences between the sub-funds in Australia and the donor-advised funds that are large in the US?
Yeah, so some of you will know that so-called donor-advised funds in the US, which are their equivalent of sub-funds, they get a lot of attention in the US, and they've been booming. So in 2017, they surpassed $100 billion in assets. So they are really taking off in the US. So we're not at that sort of level yet in Australia. But it's fair to say that I think if sub-funds are promoted more, and hopefully this data will help with that, and we don't just talk about PAFs and other foundations, we talk about a whole diverse range of ways that people can give. There's PAFs, there's giving circles, there's community foundations and sub-funds. There's a whole range of different ways people can give. We may see their popularity increase even further in Australia.
Well, thanks for your time today, Christian, and we look forward to sharing the survey results with our members.
Thanks, Sarah.